Hey there, everyone. Before we get going with what I think is going to be a really fun and special episode that's going to have my mom critiquing my work, I wanted to announce what's going to be going on for the next week here on the channel. Sean's on vacation with his family, uh, Wisconsin, Minnesota, I don't know, somewhere where it's snowy. And so we're going to do something that we've been planning for a while, and I think it will be a good not wrap up to Strange Death. It's not like Strange Death is going anywhere. We still have copies available, and hopefully we'll sell out soon enough and start thinking about a second printing. But Sean's got a bunch of other books that he's already announced and will be announcing, and so on the channel we want to focus on promoting those things. And like I said, not that Strange Death is going anywhere. We're really proud of the book, but I want to do a Strange Death celebration and wrap up week. So we'll be talking to my mom about the book, and then I've had these 6 copies of the misprints that we call the blue meanie misprints. There were 9 in total that I kept. There are, these are the only official copies of the misprints out there that are living the line approved. And then what I've done is I've done sketches in them. So when Strange Death got printed, the first printing went with some of the pages, like this page here didn't have the blue art on it. The blue art's part of the end of the story, and 4 of the pages got printed without that. And those got sent to Diamond, those got sent to Amazon, and a lot of them made it in customers' hands, even though they were all supposed to be destroyed. So there's copies, unapproved copies out there. So we wanted to make 9 special approved copies, and we call these the Blue Meanies editions. We call them the Blue Meanies because Dave and I had problems with printing blue many times. I've talked about that before on the channel. Many times throughout working on Strange Death, we just seem to have a problem with the color blue, especially printing blue ink, and we colloquially called that the Blue Meanies. So there's 9 of these. They've got a signed book plate by myself and Dave, and it's labeled the Blue Meanies Misprint Edition, and it has an edition of 1 through 9. 2 of them have already been given away, and one of them's already spoken for from a collector. But one of them went to the guys at Cartoonist Kayfabe, Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor, because they were really supportive of Strange Death of Alex Raymond. They've been really supportive of our channel, so that was a thank you to them. And then another one went to Omar at Near Mint Condition because he was also very helpful and supportive of promoting the book when we were doing the Kickstarter, and then again when it came out into bookstores. So 2 of the 9 are already gone. A third one's already spoken for. So there's 6 total left. And the other thing that makes these books special is on another one of the pages where there was a double page spread where none of the art was printed. I went in and just doodled each one has a different set of blue meanies. So this is my best straight to pen, no sketching ahead of time, just pick up a blue ballpoint and go. It's my best attempt to draw these other dimensional entities, blue meanies, that were messing with us throughout the whole production of the book. And that's actually part of the story too, this idea of higher entities mucking about in the world. So it's of whole cloth with the story. If you haven't read the story yet, get one of these and read it, and it may be even more chilling. And if you have read the story, then probably this whole thing is already kind of chilling and makes sense to you. So those will be just the 6 of them that will be up for sale. They're already posted on Sean's Living the Line site, so there's not going to be an auction or anything like that. They're just posted up there. I forget exactly what price point we put them at, but like $160, I think, $180 maybe. The signed and numbered editions went for $80 through the Kickstarter, the ones that were signed by me and Dave and limited to 300. So these ones being signed by me and Dave and limited to 9 with original art in them, we feel like these are valuable collector's items. They're a misprint, which is always a valuable collector item. So those are up. What I'll be doing for the rest of the week is I'll be posting time-lapse videos of me doing the drawings. I don't want to post a real-time video. Those are, probably hour and a half a piece that it took me to do these things. So we'll be just posting for the rest of the week We won't be doing reviews or anything. It's just going to be one quick time lapse of each one with a link to where you can purchase that particular edition. I'll also maybe on the first day I'll put up the couple that have already been given away and spoken for. So the one that went to the Jim and Ed, and the one that went to Omar. I'll post videos of those as well. So that's what this week on Living the Line is going to be. While Sean's on vacation, and me and him will reconnect, and we'll start getting back to the regularly scheduled content soon. But let's have a good Strange Death of Alex Raymond blowout here, and then really start getting excited for all the cool new stuff that Sean's got coming forward. He's already announced Plaza by Yuichi Okayama, and just announced, I don't think he's announced it on the channel yet, but he's announced it on Instagram and Twitter and stuff. Eric Creek, who's a really amazing artist. His new book, I think it's called The Exile. It's like a Viking book that's coming out, and if you haven't seen Eric Creek's work before, look that up. Both of those books are going to be phenomenal. Everything else that's forthcoming is going to be phenomenal. And then what we're going to go do right now is my mom is going to sit here, and this will be what is the first of what I hope will be intermittent, ongoing. We'll call it Mama Ba reviews, or Mama Ba reacts, and hopefully we can get my mom, who's never read a comic in her life, to read some of the things that we all think are worthwhile. So for the first one, as the wrapping up with the Strange Death promotion, my mom is going to tell me what she thinks about my first graphic novel. So enjoy it. Welcome to this special episode of Living the Line. We're going to call this Mama Ba Reacts, because this is my mom, Carson Grubaugh. Hi, Mom. How's it going?
Hi, good. I'm doing good.
Mom just got back from dance class with my niece Emerson. My mom only had my dad and then me and my brother in the house for my whole life, so she's very excited to have a granddaughter to go do girly stuff with, right?
Yes, absolutely. Tutus and, frilly pink stuff and Elsa wands and yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna make you do. You're gonna be back in the land of very boy stuff now, and I appreciate you coming on to do this. I have the best mom in the world, and she has actually gone through and read. She got and read the entire Strange Death of Alex Raymond, which for those of you who have owned it and read it already, you know that for someone who doesn't read comic books, and even for those of you who do, it's a pretty challenging read. So that's how much my mom loves me. So we're gonna get your opinion. What did you think, Mom?
Well, like you said, I am not a comic book reader. The only comics I read when I was a little girl were like Casper and Wendy and the Archie comics. Um, I just never really liked the style of, following word bubbles and tracking the text along the page and stuff. So it was very hard uh, for me to not have it be linear and just go, chronologically. But I plowed through it. It took me a long time. I started in January when I had COVID and I was sick and I couldn't do anything. So that was a good time to start. But it was definitely challenging, and not knowing any of the artists or the people they were talking about um, was hard too. It was hard keeping track of the names and things like that, just because they're not familiar to me.
Yeah. Well, you and Dad have always said that. I don't like reading comics. I don't like the word balloons and tracking it. But you guys obsessively read the newspaper strips every day. So is it just because they go in a row and you don't have to go down that's different?
I guess so, yeah, because it's sequential. So there's like one or two word bubbles, and then the next panel, but it's not just scattered all over. Where you have to
Yeah.
are they you have to figure out, are they going across, or is the text going down and around, or and this was challenging too, because there was a lot of like the comic strips that were being referred to in the text,
Hmm.
and then superimposed over that was artwork and text bubbles, and so I wasn't ever quite sure, am I supposed to read the strip, is that part of what's being said, or do I just follow the word bubbles around? So that was confusing to me. And then not having any knowledge of what those comic strips were to begin with, um, I just kind of felt in the dark most of the time.
Well, the whole reason I wanted to do this is because when you first talked to me about it, you were like, why would anyone want to read this? He's just talking about like how to use your brush and stuff. And then you seemed a little bit more interested in like the later more conspiracy theory stuff. And most people who react to the book are like, oh, all the stuff at the beginning is awesome, and then he goes off the rails and it makes no sense, and like, why did he write that part? So that's why I thought, oh, that's funny, we'll interview mom and see what she thinks.
Well, yeah, that was, in fact, I texted you a picture where I was like halfway through the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I've read this much of the book up to page 100 and I don't know, 65 or something like that. And it's like, it's just talking about what pen or brush the guy used and how thick or thin his line was. It's like, I wouldn't even have noticed any of that or the difference in the artwork. I mean, except the really obvious ones, but the minute differences in brushstrokes and stuff, I wouldn't have even noticed or picked up on if I had just been reading different artists' comic books,
Yeah.
if it hadn't been spelled out in there. I mean, I had no idea. I'm really clueless with all that. But yes, much to my chagrin, even on page 165, when I thought the strange death of Alex Raymond was going to be discussed, it it just went on and on about Margaret Mitchell.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people go, huh? um but I don't know, it sounded to me like you did think that part of the book was more interesting.
um, yeah, I did, but I kept waiting for it to talk about the death of Alex Raymond,
Yeah.
and we never quite really got there. So, yeah, it was a little confusing, but um, I don't know. It
Well,
brought up
that's
a lot of interesting things to think about, but
okay. What are some of those? You showed me a big list beforehand of
oh, okay. Some of the
show
things I
show
liked
everyone
about
your look at
the
look at
first
look
thing.
at look at how awesome she is. She took show us your notes. Yeah. If everyone read comics like this, like it was an essay for college, the medium would be way better off. Like notepad on the side. So what's on your notepad, mom?
Well, the first thing I noticed that I thought was way cool was the little running gag line under the copyright and all rights reserved about we don't accept submissions.
Well, no, that's I don't know that that's a gag line. I didn't even see that. Where you really thorough. Where is that at?
It's down on the bottom of the beginning of every section of the first part. Here,
Oh, in the
okay, let
inside
me,
front cover. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, where is it?
Like most of
So,
the time. Okay.
so right down
Yeah.
at the very bottom.
Yeah.
And it changed like every time there was one of these, it said something a little bit different.
Oh,
And
Sean, you sneaky man. Well,
I'm just kind
see,
of weird like
this
that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
you know more about my book than I do now.
You didn't know that was there?
No, Sean must have put that in there when he was doing all of that because that's all his company information. No. Well, see, there you go. That's why we have to have Mama Ba reviews because she's going to come in and point out stuff I didn't know. Sean, my mom is the only one who found your joke because no one has pointed that out to us yet. So,
Oh, seriously? That's
yeah.
funny. Well, I don't know. I guess, like I said, I was sick. I had nothing to do. I was just reading everything. So, but yeah, I thought that was very good. I liked it because it changed. Like every one of those was a little bit different. It was funny. So I
You're
like
gonna
that.
now everyone's gonna go back and read their book thanks to you. Everyone thought they got it all, and now I'm going back and looking. It's not our lawyers that made us say it. I mean, that's true too. They did, but we mean it also.
But then the
That's
next, yeah, they're each different a little bit. So that was
I would have
good.
never noticed that.
A little bit of
Uh,
humor there. I liked the Jack segments, introducing each episode and how, you know, the comic book cover, um, which for the next section shows up, you know, in the Jack section.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was very intentional. That's
What,
interesting too, because I think a lot of people were very confused by those sequences, and that was something that the longer I worked on it with Dave and those sequences went away, I was like, do you really want to keep those in there? Like, are they necessary? And he had some plan for it that I never understood, which is why I put Jack at the back of the book. Like, guys, like, why did I need to be part of this? You know, it's like when
well,
it's
I
left
like
to me
that
to
too.
finish it.
I like that too because I kind of thought the same thing. It was like it was a nice way to intro each section, but like then what did it have? So I thought that was really funny that you tied it in at the end with that. I thought that was very clever. But you
Yeah,
are clever, so.
thank you. I felt like I needed to, because so much of it was left hanging. Like, you know, the fact of it never dealing with Alex Raymond's death. If Dave would have stayed on it, it would have got there. But
Oh, okay.
I couldn't speak to what his final thesis was, because I don't know. And I think it's still evolving for him, you know, like I think from where we were at to where he's at now, I don't know, we don't really talk about it, but I think he's changed his mind again, and that's probably where he wind up saying, you know, I can't finish the book because it's just every bit of research more I do, it's some other kind of answer. um, so yeah, I was like, how to wrap up all of those strings that he left without spending another 80 years of my life on it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so that got me confused too. Were there separate individual comic books published? Strange Death of Alex Raymond 1, was that a separate comic book? Like she's holding, like Jack's holding in the introductions to each section? Was that published separately?
Well, that's why those framing sequences came to place in Dave's mind, is they were originally going to be published as individual issues, and the whole series would have come out that way. And so he had these covers, and he had these title pages, you know, that have the credit pages that have the art interspersed with them, was part of the story. And then when he decided to do graphic novels, it's like, well, I've got these really nice illustrations, and I'm going to have to go redraw the credits pages to try and make it all one continuous thing. And he'd been breaking the story up as if it were in issues. And so he came up with that framing sequence to try and make sense of it as a collection of books that had never been published, you know. And
Oh,
I think he had some overarching plan about, you know, drawing, like he uses Jack to introduce me later in the book. And I don't know how he was intending on bringing her back, but I think he was intending on wrapping that stuff into the story eventually. Um, you know, but it initially started just to make sense of the fact that what were supposed to be single comics but never were, you know, why do they have covers and stuff in the graphic novel when that's the first thing and only thing that ever came out?
okay. Well, so now I'm confused again because when I read Sean's letter at the end of the book, I kind of got the thought that they had come out in separate issues because he said
Mhm.
something about how in one of those that there was oh, what was it, the sequence of was it Drake that was in the hospital, and it was like 6 pages or something like that, 6 panels, and then in this one it was condensed down to 1 page. And so I went back through to try to find it, and the only page I found that looked like the same pictures that he had at the bottom of the letter.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, it was him laying in bed, um, having a nervous breakdown, but it looked like he was in bed at home. But it looked like the same pictures, just not a hospital bed, but a bed. So I thought, oh, well, maybe the story of Alex Raymond had been published separately in these comic books. I should have read them to get the story. But
Well, yeah, so there was, and that's what Dave describes in the beginning, is that book Glamour Puss.
Yeah.
in the very first chapter. That's what Sean's referring to. So he did publish up to the car crash. So the book Glamour Puss covered most of this material, but in a briefer format with less bombastic page designs. I would say it was more
Yeah.
straightforward, and it was interspersed with all these drawings of Sarah Jessica Parker and stuff. And so it'd be like half fashion magazine, half this stuff, and no one know what to do with it. And so that when that got canceled, then it was like, well, let's just take the Strange Death stuff and revise it and make it better. Plus, his theory had changed about the metaphysical stuff by the end of Glamour Puss, so he basically had to redo the whole thing. But that's what Sean's referring to. There wasn't a Strange Death of Alex Raymond comic. There was
Okay.
25 issues of Glamour Puss that had some of this stuff, but it's all been
Okay.
totally, except for those first few pages, which are pretty much straight out of Glamour Puss with new dialogue. The rest of it's all revised. But some of the same information about the printmaking and the brush, and he didn't give away the brush trick in Glamour Puss, but some of that was in there.
So I have a question regarding that stuff. What is a nightingale test pattern? Because that shows up like, here it is, here it is, here it is. Like, what is it? I don't know what that
I
is.
think that's like Dave's term for that really fine brush cross hatching. I'll see if I can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's just Dave talking about the really teeny tiny lines that Alex Raymond could get with his brush. Let's see, which page is that on? But yeah, that little bubble that he puts over things, that's just him pointing out where someone has done that technique. That's not something that existed prior. Yeah, like right here, these bubbles on 121. That pattern on the woman's face where she's saying snake look out, and it's that cross hatching pattern, that's done with
Okay.
that's done with a brush. And that was just Dave saying that Alex Raymond, I think he called it the test pattern because he would put that over top of something, and he was using that to test the printmakers to see if they were doing their job. Were they over or
Oh,
under exposing his photo? So I think that's why Dave calls that the Nightingale brushstroke. I don't know exactly why he chose that term, but he would put that over something like that woman screaming, and then if they didn't do their job, that whole face would just turn into like a murky black. And so it was
okay. That
him,
makes sense.
yeah, him pushing the limits of the reproduction. Like on page 108, where you can see the actual reprints, and you see how his leg almost disappears into the shadow that's on the wall behind him, and then Dave's recreation where the shadow's like a mid-gray. That shows the problem of reproduction that he's talking about when he's talking about the Nightingale pattern. Yeah.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah, but it's a strange little bubble that he puts over top of things for sure. So yeah. All right. What else is on Mama Buzz reacts notes?
Let's see.
You're paying more attention than most of our readers, so you're giving them a lesson in how to be a critical reader.
How did you? It's called close reading. Do
Yeah.
close
My
reading.
my mom was a teacher for her entire career. Just retired.
Yes, and I have my survivor teacher shirt on for surviving teaching in COVID.
Yeah, yeah. We both got a couple years into that.
So what else did I like? Well, the artwork's amazing.
Thank
You
you.
know, no bias there, but
Yeah.
it
Well,
is
most of
amazing
it's
artwork.
Dave's art, so
Oh, a
kudos
lot of
to
it's
Dave.
yours too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't realize that until the end. Also, I think maybe reading Sean's letter that those weren't just reproduced pictures of the old comic strips, but that Dave actually like learned how to draw in that style and then redrew those strips. Was that correct? Am I correct in
Yeah,
that?
I,
Or
I mean, he was crazy. So he'd like have the strip next to him, and then he'd repencil it and then ink it. I would print it out with the poorly reproduced version, or if I could find a scan of the original version, then I'd basically just re-ink it. But yeah, for copyright reasons, we couldn't just like copy their art and put it in there. So
Which
all
that
of it,
makes sense now. Yeah.
yeah, all of it had to be redone. The other thing is we don't have access to the really good quality images of it. So Dave had to, and me in a number of spots, had to speculate like, let's see if I can find one that I did. So like on page 238, 239, there's a whole bunch of stuff that swapped. We had like bad color scans of a lot of that, or just the bad reproductions. And then me and Dave had to kind of guess, like, okay, how thick was this line actually? This area looks kind of like a blob, but that was probably like a bunch of cross hatching. So it's a weird thing where we were trying to guess best as we could what the original art looked like if we didn't have access to a photograph of the original, which was a lot of the time.
Yeah, because some of those were like super old. Like
Mm-hmm.
from I didn't even realize, I guess, that comic books have been around since the 20s. I don't know how far
Yeah.
do they when did they start? I mean, I know comic strips and little comics, political cartoons and things like that have been in papers for probably as long as there's been publishing, but
Yeah, I
I
think
never.
1907 is the first comic strip. Uh, our viewers are going to get mad at me that I'm not that good of a historian. I don't know when Superman and all the actual books hit, but they started in the strips. I think it was 1907 that the Yellow Kid came to the newspapers, and that was the first time you had like someone with word balloons in like a strip format. There was cartoon and stuff before that, but uh, yeah, I don't know when they started putting them in books exactly, but they were just collections of the newspaper strips at first.
Oh, the comic books were.
Yeah, and then someone realized like, oh, hey, we can like make new content for these too. We don't just have to like take the strips out of the paper and put those in the book. But yeah, a lot of the images I got were like colored too, and like really bad scans. So we'd have to strip out the color. Like this stuff on 236 was all in really bad color images, and so I'd have to digitally strip out the color and then figure out what the art looked like when it was left over. So that was fun.
So
This is what
it
we
had
think.
been colorized like old movies because
Well,
they
it's
wouldn't
just
have
like a color
printed it
comic
originally.
book, you know,
It
like
would
an
have
old
been.
color comic book with all the dots and stuff.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
And some of them are really bad, beat up old copies with really bad printing. And so, like, no one, there's no way to tell what the original art really looked like. We just had to guess. Um, so that was fun challenge. I apologize to all the artists whose stuff we've copied and it doesn't look anything like their art, but that's what it was.
They're probably not alive anymore, so you don't have to worry.
Most of them, yeah, unfortunately. Some of them, maybe, but yeah, probably not. They all got in car crashes.
Well, and that brings up a point because some of them went back. Some of the comics I think were from like the 20s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think I could be wrong, but I think in that time period there was a big interest in the occult and seances and that kind of stuff. And so when it started talking about, um, see, and I don't remember the guy's name, the one artist that was really big into occultic things and started showing up with occultic things, in the artwork and whatever. I mean, that would have been kind of a common thing, right? At that time period.
Ward Green, the writer.
Was it Ward Green? One of the in that section somewhere. I think I have written down somewhere, but uh
The guy that was hanging out with Aleister Crowley and all of that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Ward Green was the guy that wrote Strange Death of Alex Raymond. And it is factual info. I know a lot of this is like real conspiracy theory stuff, but it is factual information that he did hang out with Aleister Crowley and he did hang out with William Seabrook. Um, and yeah, they were definitely in. They were. I mean, they're hanging out with Aleister Crowley, so they
Yeah.
were involved in that stuff, and that's where I think, as crazy as some of what's in the book sounds, once you know that, it's hard to also completely dismiss the fact that this guy, and when you read the strips and you see some of the weird images and weird references and like the tarot card thing that I showed, it's like
Yeah.
it's pretty hard to think that he didn't that some of that wasn't intentional. Whether that actually manifested demons in reality that killed people, I don't know. But yeah, I
Well,
don't
you
know.
mess around with occultic things and strange things happen. Weird stuff happens. But
Yeah.
I
So
just thought that would have been, and I meant to, but I didn't have time to get to that because I just finished reading the book this week. So I was gonna like see if I could find some kind of parallel timeline of, when uh, occultic things kind of peaked in popular interest and seances and that kind of thing, and see if it matched up. But I didn't get
well,
to doing that.
probably like late 1800s would have been the peak of it. And then Aleister Crowley, he's like late 1800s, early 1900s. Like he
Hmm.
came out of Victorian era and then into the modern era. Like so he was publishing in early 1900s up through the 1920s, 1940s. But I think at that point it was probably dying off, and then it picked back up when you were a kid.
Yeah, in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we
The
definitely did Ouija boards and things like that, but I mean, it was just, like playing a game,
but
you know?
especially Crowley as a figure, like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and all those. Like Led Zeppelin actually bought his house, one of his houses on Loch Ness, is how much they were into that stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it was at I would assume, yeah, like in the 20s, like with the Roaring Twenties and all of the
Yeah.
surrealist and Dada art, that yeah, mysticism would have been like pretty popular at that point. So it's not crazy to me. It seems actually probably very likely to me that he was he was obviously involved in that stuff and was probably, I mean, if you get interested in that stuff, you're trying to use it to your advantage, I would assume.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so it's not
It
as strange as it seems to think that he was packing his cartoons with those references.
yeah.
So,
And, on there was one thing that I noticed on page 276, Lady Lilliput is talking to her dolls, and she calls them "my precious." And I was
oh,
wondering if there was something that, like, I don't know when Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings and all that, but I wondered if there was some kind of, like, connection with Gollum there.
I would assume this was pre. That's something that we never looked at. Oh God, if Dave sees this now, that's going to be a whole other rabbit hole he goes in. Eddie Kana, if you're watching this, Eddie, don't send Dave down the Gollum. I would think that this was published before, and this is definitely the page you're on is one of the strange ones where you can't see it really well because this is actually reproduced from the actual publication, not a recreation of the art. Because I never intentionally didn't finish these pages, but Honey Dorian's shirt there, her that shirt has writing all over it, and she's wearing that witch hat, and on that shirt is a bunch of names of other comic strips. It's like
Oh,
her
okay.
shirts made out of comic strip titles, which is a really weird one that I know Dave was gonna get further into um, as he went. But yeah, I don't know about the. You just opened up
My
another rabbit
precious.
hole. Yeah,
Oh, that was pretty obvious to me. That jumped out. It's like you don't hear that "my precious" too much outside of Lord of the Rings,
yeah.
but
I was so
I
down my
thought that
own
was
rabbit
great.
holes, I didn't even notice that. That's funny.
Okay. You want me to just keep going?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just curious because you obviously read it really carefully. Like I said, more
Right.
carefully. So you're pointing things
One
out to
one
me.
thing that I really liked because I mean, me coming from a Christian point of view and all that, on page 262, there was a Bible reference and then a phrase that was translated as puncture of time.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard of that before. And so I looked up the scripture and read it. And it's about where Satan takes Jesus and shows him like all the kingdoms of the world. And I thought, whoa, what if that was all the kingdoms of the world in a puncture of time where time was done
Mm,
away with, and you could see
okay.
like all the kingdoms of the world, like from ever
Yeah.
to ever.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that really piqued my interest.
that Greek phrase that translated literally into in puncture of time. That's what you're talking about. Like, because
Yeah, yeah.
there's some Greek here that he translates. So did you
Uh,
go check your literal translation? You guys have a big
oh, I didn't look that far. I just read the verse in my Bible, and it just says, I think in a moment of time or something, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, something like that,
so that's
which
the
could be,
translation that you got.
yeah. I mean, I
Okay.
could go look it up if you want it to
No,
exactly,
no, no,
but
no. I just wondered if you went and verified in the translation source you have. Yeah,
I did not do that.
Dave's really careful about that. Like he checks everything in the literal translation because of things like that. Uh, where like in a moment of time seems like, well, just in one instant he showed you all the kingdoms. But like you said,
Right.
if you look at the literal translation and it's puncturing through time, and Dave spends a lot of time. I mean, like probably on that page, I probably didn't read it, but when he sent me notes for, so that page is what I would get from Dave, like the layout, and then my tracings of if there was photographs and all that blue. So that's what a page looked like coming from Dave, and then there would probably be 16 pages of typed notes that would go with that. That would include biblical exegesis,
Uh,
and yeah, he might have gone into that. I would have to go get, I didn't read all of that because to me it's like overwhelming, but um I'd be curious to go back to that now. That's
no.
interesting.
Well, that was
That
really cool. I even wrote puncture of time in my Bible above the phrase moment of time, like to help me remember that when I read it again, because that just makes that even more powerful and interesting and overwhelming and everything, that he could have like just gone outside of time and seen all the kingdoms of the world forever. I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, I mean that's what as much as people, poke fun at some of that stuff that Dave says, he is very thorough like that. And that's what I think one of the things that I was most interested in, especially when you told me that, like, why are you guys obsessing about like how they make the teeny tiny lines, and you because you do have that worldview that I don't, and I know that breaks your heart, but um I wondered if the later stuff would be more palatable to you than to a secular audience, because it's not so strange for you to think that there are malignant forces that can possess people, or that
Yeah.
people would try and deal with malignant forces.
Well,
So
yeah, and like I said, in my opinion, whenever you start messing with the occult, it's not going to turn out good. It's going to end up bad in, destruction, death, all kinds of bad things.
So did that make the later part of the book like less conspiracy theory and more like, yeah, that could be, when you read it?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not really quite sure what the conspiracy theory was. Yeah, that was the part that I never really connected. Like, was the book saying that because somebody borrowed somebody else's brushstroke that they were going to end up trying to kill him in a car accident? Was there a conspiracy there that he stole my art form and so I'm going to like get back at it? I mean, that just I wasn't sure if that's where it was going with that. Um
Well, I think
what
over time, and for people who read the Glamour Puss stuff, they might know a little bit better. Over time, I think what Dave was building towards was that he had these moments of sin, or for other people, bad karma, that
Okay.
started causing these fractures in reality that would later come back to bite him in the ass. And some stuff I know he was working on, or maybe is working on now. Apparently he's working on the book again, doing the mock-ups. But Alex Raymond, Dave thinks there was significant amounts of infidelity. And I know in the original Glamour Puss material, I think the infidelity was maybe more at the root of what caused the car wreck. And then I know as he shifted towards the Ward Green material, I think Ward Green's lust for Margaret Mitchell and his interactions with the occult introduced like another bad element on top of that, and so kind of those karmic consequences started to pile up in a way that had repercussions. um I don't know that Dave thought that Raymond was explicitly involved in the occult stuff in the way that Ward Green was. And looking at Margaret Mitchell, I know too, he's suggesting that she had a pretty wild youth and then
Yeah.
became a Christian and reformed, but
Well, I didn't get that part. I didn't see any of that in there. Was that just like from her biography, history?
yeah, there's the one page in the middle of all the ones I did where Dave took over again and drew one page, and there's like an angel, and it's talking about Zelda Fitzgerald and
Yeah.
Margaret Mitchell both having become religious later in life,
Oh,
and that's why she tried to like kind of disavow, I think, that this page here, page 230, he talks about kind of her religiousness, but that might have been some stuff that I'm knowing just because I know some of what didn't get made. But yeah, Margaret Mitchell became pretty religiously devout later in life and
oh, okay.
really settled into her role as like a wife in a religious context. And I think kind of disavowed. I'm not an expert on that, but I think kind of disavowed the nature of Scarlett O'Hara, which is pretty anti-religious and pretty
Yeah,
lady in red.
from a lot of the stuff, it seemed like she might have been into S&M or something like that. That Apache dance. I actually um, did a YouTube search to see if there was a video of what the Apache dance was,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a pretty rough tango, but
Yeah.
but the woman fights back in it too. So it's not just like she's being totally abused. She puts up the struggle and all that. But it's like, well, maybe she was into that kind of stuff. I don't know. It sounds like you said, like she had kind of a wild reputation.
Yeah, and so I think part of what Dave is saying is Ward Green's obsession with Margaret Mitchell, the Margaret Mitchell of her youth, that wild girl that he knew when he was a young reporter, and his kind of constant mucking about in their life, which again that's true stuff. I mean, those are letters that Dave found in the archive, and they had to be edited, but in whatever archive of whatever university has her stuff, there's those letters. Now his interpretation of whether it was blackmail or whether Ward Green was just letting an old friend know that her ex-husband was shopping around a dirty book, that's up for debate. But there's also legit stories that that they, like Stan Drake says, he had blackmailed Margaret Mitchell into writing this comic strip, and he was trying to get the Gone with the Wind. That's all factual stuff.
Okay.
So I think he thinks that Raymond stealing, Raymond cheating on his wife, the all of the mystical muckery about in the that Ward Green was doing kind of all came together, and had they all died. Ward Green died, Margaret Mitchell died, Alex Raymond died, that it affected all of them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that stuff happens. So the one thing I was confused about, now, since we're on the topic of Margaret Mitchell, is there was a lot of references to all these other women in comic books that um, he said were Margaret Mitchell, and it's like, okay, how do you know that? It didn't look like the same person, and you know, a lot of them had the MM initials, but I mean, wasn't that a common thing? Like, Peter Pan and um, I can't think of
Lex
anything now that I have on
Luthor,
my.
Lana Lang, Lois
Yeah,
Lane.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a comic. I mean, a common literary strategy. I don't know what you would call it, but where the names are like that.
Okay, so then this is a curious question for you. Like in Dave's view, those aren't Margaret Mitchell. They're like symbolic instances of the type. And that because whatever was going on with Ward Green and Margaret Mitchell and Alex Raymond was in Dave's mind a pretty impactful event, that spilled out to the rest of our reality, that traces of that show up forwards and backwards. And I mean, we've talked about that before. I think that, like, you get all those coincidences around 9/11 really close, and then the further back you go, the less of them you get. I think casually me and you have talked about that. Or like I was always talking about how Trump, there's all these coincidences around Trump. So it's kind of like I could see it coming. I
Yeah,
think Dave is suggesting that, like, if you take his spiritual, metaphysical worldview of reality, then those things are they're not Margaret Mitchell, but they're signs of that activity on the spiritual plane showing up kind of
showing it.
subconsciously. So do you
So
buy
that
into that then?
what?
Like, do you buy into that worldview? Because you're more you think there is a spiritual realm and stuff in a way that I don't. So does that make
That
more
those
sense to you?
it makes me understand what he was talking about in reference to Margaret Mitchell.
Okay.
Um, I was going to say it came to mind that instead of being called The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, that maybe this should have been The Surreal Inversions of Margaret Mitchell, and then it would be SIMM.
Oh, Dave, you just got played. This is going to be our most popular episode. Wow, Mom. Oh, you should have wrote the book. I considered it calling it The Strange Death of the Strange Death of Alex Raymond, because
Oh, that would have been good too.
my ending, this is my version of the book. That's what Dave says. This isn't his version. This is Carson's version that he allowed. Is, this is a story about the book falling apart, and it's not about the death of Alex Raymond in the end. It was about the project getting too big under its own weight.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I could finish it, because I'm not Dave and I don't have all the same ideas and research that he does. So left to finish it, that's the most I could do with it. But I like that one, the strange inversions. Dave, you just got played by my mom.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if I think that there's some kind of like spiritual force that would make things like that show up, but I mean, the stuff like that does happen that is interesting, where it seems like, um, there's a lot of the same type of thing popping up around the same time period.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think there's two ways to think about that, which is like if you take your worldview, which is like God's up top and kind of creating everything below, then that's part of the story. And you see those things. The story kind of repeats in multiple places. And artists especially would be in tune to that, you know, realm up there, and so they'd kind of be picking up on it. And then what I describe in the back is that as reality creates itself from the bottom up, there's patterns that emerge, like birds flying create a pattern. And so there's a zeitgeist, like certain things are in the air at a certain time, and like you
right.
said, there were like a certain type of mysticism was in the air. Car crash stories were in the air, like how many songs about like lovers curve or what,
Dying
all that
and
oldies
yeah.
music that I would listen to when I was a kid. There was all car crash stories because automobiles were new and that was the sign of a
Mhm.
teenager. So I looked at it more as like these narrative patterns. It does start to get weird when they're always Jane and Judy and, you know, everywhere. And that's where you can get into the conspiracy theory string wall,
Yeah.
which is a
But
fun
I
game to
mean,
play.
but like the name Margaret was a very popular name, and Peggy was the short name for it. And, I mean, that would pop up just because it was a popular name. So some of the stuff I thought was just um, things that might have just been common and popular at that time to write about, and to kind of play around with with the storyline involving the naughty girl and that kind of thing, to break out of the strict Judeo-Christian morality that was pretty prevalent in the United States at that time, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, it did. I mean, it would get confusing to me as one rabbit hole thread was going on and then another one crosses over it and kind of mixed up where, for me, it's easier if things are more linear. So if you take one rabbit hole and like trace it all the way out to the end and then go back and start another one, and that would have been more easier for me to pull it all together.
Yeah, I
Does that
think
make sense?
yeah. And I can hold on a second. I'm gonna go. Can you hear the dogs?
Just
Oh,
when you
you.
said that, but
Oh, okay. They've been barking like crazy. Um, yeah, I think the problem is when you start to see that this hole connects to this hole, connects to this hole, connects to this hole, it's really hard to rein yourself in and go one at a time. But I think he was trying to go one at a time. Let's look at the Margaret Mitchell stuff, and let's look at the Ward Green stuff. Let's look at the Stan Drake stuff. But it all just seems so far from Alex Raymond at that point. I think that's where people
yeah,
like are like, oh, you're losing the thread. But I do think that there was a web of rabbit holes that were, we trying to tie
crisscross.
them. Yeah, and I tried to tie them back together as much as I could with the Cersei stuff that I saw, but
And that just added another thing to it.
yeah. When I emailed Dave about that stuff, he was like, "I can't go down that one with you. You keep track of it. Sounds good. You write." The plan was is that I would write my own follow-up book to the book that talked about that stuff. So
Oh,
that material was always going to get out there, but it would have been like a second like book, like a smaller book of like my experience with it. But it got into the final one because he quit. So what didn't you like?
well, those things that we've been talking about, kind of the choppy, how things got mixed up. When I first started reading it, I was reading it kind of with a skeptical mind of, okay, so what's the conspiracy, and is it really conspiracy, or is it just like 6 degrees of separation? You could connect anything if you spread those rings out far enough. You can find some kind of connection in a weird way. Like let's see, I wrote down here that there was something about him meeting his wife in like um, a GI dance kind of thing. And then that showed up in the comic book. The one gal went to one of those, what do you call them? Where they had the dances for the soldiers. And
Yeah,
it's like, well, in the 30s, 40s, I mean, that was really popular because it was wartime, and you know,
yeah.
that's where the girls went to go meet all the handsome guys in their uniforms and vice
Yeah,
versa.
yeah. I
So
think
some of that, I was looking at it skeptically, going, well, that could have just been one of those things that happened a lot, and so it would reference a lot in writing and stories and stuff. And then the other thought too, and I know this happens a lot with Disney stuff, that they writers purposely put things in about their personal life, an address, house address, or somebody's name, or something like that, where they consciously, purposely include that in as kind of a little inside joke, and a way to bring, I don't know if it's honoring their family, but like, I put you in the book, and that character's got your name, that kind of thing.
well, and I think Dave is suggesting that the more you do that intentionally, and the more that you start to use that for wish fulfillment, that's where it gets dangerous because you start crossing the boundary between reality and fiction. And I think that's what he means largely by the comic book metaphysics. I mean, some of it is that this things show up in stories from elsewhere, but like that the main mechanism, or at least this is how I thought about it, is that when you put real things into a story, now you've like teleported a real thing into a fictional setting. And if you
Hmm.
can do it that way, then there's a potential for it to come back out the other way. And that the
Yeah.
more intentionally you do it. And then I think he was saying Ward Green really liked having Alex Raymond because Alex Raymond was doing it with the most amount of realism. So the boundary between reality and fiction was smaller than like a cartoon, because I guess
Yeah.
because it looked more realistic. um and the frequency with which he was doing it, and then adding the intentional occult elements to it, that they made the boundary between the reality and the fiction porous somehow. I think that's like his idea of how it
Yeah.
works. It's just whether you buy that, like whether you have a spiritual worldview or some worldview that allows for that, or whether you think that is a completely silly idea.
Or that those things just kind of happen, and it's curious maybe, but not some kind of a metaphysical conspiracy or something.
Yeah, or that there's psychological elements. Like if you sit around doing stories about lusting after the girl who's your model,
Yeah.
you're going to wind up sleeping with her probably, because psychologically you've been telling yourself this story over and over about, like, I want to sleep with this girl, and then you do,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then yeah. So I that's another thing I think, is when people read this, it's like up to them. Do you have a spiritual worldview that allows for this, or can you see it on a psychological level or a societal psychological level of this was just in the air? Is this just Dave connecting too many coincidences? I think that's an interesting thing for the reader to decide. So where do you fall on that in the end?
um in the end, well, I don't feel like what he was saying ever got to the end, so I can't really say for sure. But I mean, I do believe that people get involved in occultic things, that it's going to come back and bite them, and people involved in sin, adultery, that kind of thing, that's going to come back and bite them. And I mean, actions have consequences. So yeah, if you're involved in affairs and things like that, there might be some kind of retribution that comes back on you from the jilted spouse, or from just the consequences of sin in your life or whatever. So I mean, I do believe that that is true and can happen. The other stuff, it's just I don't know enough about it to really know what I think about it. I mean, it could be what he's saying, but then again, it could just be that Margaret Mitchell was a naughty girl and liked doing this kind of wild stuff, and you know
And
brought in those kind of elements into those people's lives, and I don't know.
but also,
Eh,
like, you get run over by a taxi by accident later in life, that doesn't even necessarily have anything to do with the fact that you were kind of wild in your 20s,
right, right.
not necessarily. um, so I don't know. I was just really curious about where you landed on that, because I was surprised that you read the thing in the first place. But I thought that you at least have a spiritual worldview that a lot of people who are reading it don't, and I wonder how that changed. So it's interesting. It's fun.
Okay.
It's fun
I,
here.
I don't know that I have any set opinion on this material in particular, because for one, I don't know that much about the comic book artists and the
Yeah.
stories and stuff that they're talking about to know if it's what he's saying is could be really valid or not. But I mean, just those thoughts and comments that I'd made already, things show up in real life in comics, and yeah, you get involved with bad stuff and it usually comes back and bites you, and that kind of thing. I
Do you
I agree
feel,
with that.
as someone who doesn't know anything about comics, was there any educational aspect for you of like learning who some of these people were and seeing this stuff, or was it just too obtuse?
Yeah, I did. I liked, especially how there was like a little sketch of who the comic book artist was that was being talked about, because I don't know who they are. So,
Yeah.
I like that. And I don't, I'm not a person that really thought too much about the art or behind that kind of stuff. I mean, I was just about the story. So
Yeah.
I would read a comic, I wouldn't really care about who drew it or whatever. I just want to know what the story was.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, maybe with this too, I'm still wanting to know what the story is. I
Yeah.
still want to find out the end of the story. But that's just because I'm more of a I guess a word person, the
Yeah.
story, the linguistic part of it than the artistic part of it, because I'm not an artist. So that stuff doesn't speak to me as much.
I just wonder if there's like a historical educational value to the early material for people who are non-comic readers, because that's what the people who do read comics feel more like, oh, he creates this kind of lineage and legacy, and that's an interesting thing. And he's talking about how reproduction happens and how they were doing it, that's all very useful information to have on a record. But I wonder if that sparked any extra appreciation or interest in it, or if it was just like, yeah, cool, whatever.
Yeah, because I had no idea that things were that I mean, I would have never thought about the small lines not being able to be reproduced except for reading it. It brought to mind things that to my attention that I hadn't never thought about before, as far as the artwork and stuff goes. Um,
It's funny to think that you still like, I've been doing this since I was 7, and you're still like, I don't really think about the artists. I just read the stuff.
well, I mean, I look at artwork and I either like it or I don't, but I don't get so specific about looking at the brushstroke and their technique or whatever until you point stuff out to me about that.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the overall, do I like it or do I not? Do I think it's pretty or moving or whatever?
But it's interesting that someone who has had the artist there like their whole life still can look at it and not think much about the person sitting there making it.
I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. That's not like no, it's just interesting because that shows how much even easier it is for most people in a general audience to just consume the thing and think nothing about the production of it. Like, you've been
Yeah.
exposed to me as a kid, like that's all I did my whole life. And you
Yeah.
could still just, oh yeah, it's a thing to look at. So that's interesting because I think everyone that watches this channel is probably someone who sits in their room all day and makes it. And we have to realize that even someone who's seen that happen all the time doesn't care about that when they're reading the thing. Like, what's the product? I think that's a
Yeah. Well,
useful
and that's
lesson.
for me. For me, it's about what is the story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's useful. That's a good lesson for us all.
Oh,
Thank you, Mom. You're coming
I'm
in
sorry.
styling on all of us.
So I did have a question
Yeah.
of why did it switch to then at the end having the blue ink? Is that just to signify those are the unfinished pages that you took over?
Yeah, that well, I mean, multiple things. Is one, from a narrative standpoint, it's showing that it's there as a symbol to show that the work's unfinished and acknowledge that, right? Like,
Okay.
so, and I, and then there's the extra element of, had I gone through and drawn all these pages, I'd still be working on it, given how busy my work schedule is now. So when me and Sean sat down to decide whether we were just going to kickstart it and just sell it to the couple hundred people that have been following it and really want it, and just put Dave's like black and white photocopy pages in the back, and then me not write an ending and just say it's unfinished, but this is as far as we got and we know you guys want to see it. Or did we want to try and do something that could be generally released, that had some kind of ending that acknowledged that it was unfinished but tried to make an ending out of it? um it was like, I don't have the time to do all that drawing, right? This would have been, especially with my schedule now, I'd still be 3 pages into those last 60 pages.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so it was like, okay, this is a way to get it all on there without it being just totally cheap. And once we stuck on the blue line, it was like, well, it looks cool. Like, it's a really kind of beautiful solution. It allows people to see some of the process. Hopefully, like, you can see Dave's layouts and how it came to me with his photographs, and some of my tracing over the photographs that would have got printed out and inked over. You know, any of these pages like this that have this is just me doing the tracing on the computer, and then these are like the photographic elements that I would have printed and inked over. So, and the other thing is when I do the art, I print it out in blue and then I ink on top of it. So that's where we came up with the blue is, well, we'll use that blue line print that I ink over top of. So this is basically the pages waiting to be inked, as close as we could represent that. And then, you know, there's the bit of me talking to Tori at the end, like, I don't need, like, I'm so sick of this
Right.
project. I'm so frustrated. It's not even mine. Like, why am I the one responsible for finishing this? Do I really want to put the time into it? And, you know, that's real life coming into the book then, is that's the conversation we had. And she's, you know, she's like, I don't want to be hearing about this still when we're 80. So please
Yeah,
finish the
finish it.
damn book in a way that you could be happy with it. And it was like, okay, well, I'll do as much. What, how did I say it? I don't know. It's like, yeah, I'll do as much as I can stand. And like what I could stand is drawing me and her and the dogs and the things that I care about. And that
Okay.
the things that I don't care about, that are just like, this is, if I take Dave's theory at face value, this is what I saw, but I'm not invested in that enough to put the time into it. So it had all of those kind of reasons behind it. Some of it was just, I don't know, me being lazy maybe, but when me and Sean talked about it and struck on that, we felt that it was the right, because there's some other projects that I've seen published too by artists I like that never finished something, but they'll show the pages in their, you know, half inked, and art, and fans like that stuff because we like to see the process too. So I thought it could be kind of like one of those books, but that instead of just saying, well, here's the unfinished stuff, that would have a meaning to the story too. That was hope, and at least it looks cool, I hope people think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that makes sense too. Now that you explained it that way, that makes sense. On page 259, where you're comparing your name Carson with the Carson Gordon, how come the A and the S are left out of your name? Was that an intentional thing, or was that something that just didn't get printed?
Oh no, I was showing the link to the similarity in the lettering.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Carson Gordon. um and showing that's Flash Gordon, which was made by Alex Raymond, right? He created Flash Gordon, and so that lettering is the Flash Gordon lettering. Well, there's a number of them, but that's one of the letterings that was used in the old Flash Gordon comic strips. And then this
Okay.
image of my face right underneath it with like uh the weird swoopy like neck lapels or whatever. That's
Hmm.
the flat. Normally that would be Flash Gordon's head in there. So I just put my head in there.
Oh,
And
okay. See, and not being a comic book reader, I wouldn't have picked up on that.
I don't think
That's
many
why.
people would, because that's all like super Easter eggy stuff. And like me and Tori here standing here, I'm in a Flash Gordon pose, like with it split down. We got a little too close to the middle, unfortunately, and that's one of the better drawings of her, and it gets lost in the margins. But um, that's like that's a Flash Gordon pose that I'm in, and then he's like hugging, you know, like the sexy princess with her flowing dress, but of course the sexy princess isn't like 3 inches taller than him in the story. So like we thought that was funny too, you know, I'm supposed to be like this heroic Flash Gordon figure, but she's the one that looks like the superhero. So um yeah, it was just, and then that character is Carson Gordon in those strips, you know, that character that I'm saying, there's the Mr. Gordon at the
Yeah.
bottom of that page. His name is or no, his name was Carson. Yeah, I think it's I forget what's his last name.
I thought it
Yeah,
was
Mr.
Gordon.
Gordon. Yeah, his name's Carson Gordon. And then there's
See,
that
I
other.
wouldn't have known that either. I didn't know there was a comic character named Carson. Now
Well,
there's a strange art mimicking life, huh?
well, that's what that page is and that panel there, he had been introduced as Mr. Gordon previously, but that's the first time they use his name, his first name, Carson.
Yeah.
And that was published on 9/6, so 1 year to the day before Alex Raymond got in the car crash. So the
Okay.
first time Carson G shows up in Stan Drake's strip, it's Carson Gordon 1 year to the day before they die. And you've got the Flash Gordon connection and the Carson G, and that in
And you
Dave's world would also interpret as car song, or like the son of
right.
the car, which is what crashes. So that's one of those things where you're reading it, or I'm reading it as me, Carson G, the son of the car song, and I'm like, I feel like the story's looking back at me all of a sudden, like if I get into Dave's mindset. And then there's this other character, this other guy from the Big Ben Bolt, the most Herculean man in the world, Carson over there, with the Atlas shirt on. And so that's, yeah, I think that's another barrier maybe to readers, is really understanding, catching all the Easter eggs, realizing that that's me in a Flash Gordon pose, realizing that that's me in the same pose that Dave is in earlier on, like that
Oh
this
yeah, I didn't catch that either.
that this page here is me mimicking Dave shaving himself at the beginning of one of the chapters. He's in the, where is it at? He's in the bathroom, like shaving himself, and then he starts talking. Pretty much all of the Jack stuff, I don't know if you caught on to that, but most of the Jack stuff is poses from Dave's. Oh yeah, so here's Dave shaving himself on 128, and then I'm doing the same pose in our bathroom on 254. Most of the poses of Jack are from Alex Raymond panels or other images that
Oh
from
yeah.
Dave's aspect of the book. Not all of them, but there's a lot of that type of stuff that I don't know,
I didn't pick
how.
up on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it takes
I
a
didn't.
good visual memory. So that's what that Carson Gordon was. Is I was just taking the Gordon and using it to
Okay,
spell my name. So
that makes sense. But yeah, that is kind of a see, I would think of that as a funny coincidence that we named you Carson, not because of any comic book related thing, because we didn't read comics, didn't know anything about them, but we liked the name and all that. And then you end up being a comic artist.
yeah,
It's like,
and like name almost named. I'm Carson G, named in the strip of one of the guys who got in the wreck a day, like a year to the day before they get in the wreck, and the last name is the name of the most famous creation of the other guy that got in the wreck.
yeah,
And then that's where it gets creepy, even for me wanting to be skeptical, is it's not just one coincidence, it's like six coincidences all coming together into one thing, like it's this
yeah,
one panel that has like six coincidences packed into it. And then you start going, maybe Dave is onto something, that like these things bubble up or bubble down, and you go, why? Well, I don't want to be involved in this, like
yeah, yeah.
it
Well,
felt like a
hopefully they'll
second.
they'll hopefully they'll bubble down and there won't be any car crash in your future. Please
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
No. But
uh,
yeah, I liked what page is it? 260, how you're mimicking the pose of the panel. But see, with it being right there, then I can see it because I would
yeah,
not have known that that was a mimic of the pose.
and then putting
Um,
my face in the word green panel right next to it in the same pose with the glasses, and he kind of has a nose like
yeah,
mine, the big bulby nose and stuff. So there's a lot of that in the book, like a lot of visual not metaphor, but double entendre, I guess.
yeah.
yeah, things like that. So that, I mean, to me, that was the fun part, and it was really fun of how easily those final pages came together. Like you'd think with all of this different information and conspiracy theories and rabbit holes, it would be hard to put it all together. But really, when I'm putting these final pages together, it's like I was being shown other things that I hadn't even thought yet, because it was like, okay, well, what do I put over in that corner? Oh yeah, that one thing. Oh my god, that lines up perfectly. Um, like this page 298 to 299 was one like that, where I started realizing all the stuff about the double Earth surrounding the sun, and Dave's whole thing about layers on layers and layers with this other second world
Yeah.
Terra, and that how I had gone down the rabbit hole of like Terra, Tara, um, because of that tattoo that Cassie had. So, and then that links to Cassiopeia, and like just all that kind of stuff like made itself as I was putting the pages together. I didn't really plan it. It just, I started getting the things on there and they all fit perfect. And it's like, oh, that's creepy.
That part did creep me out as your mom. And the Cersei thing, it's like, what did she say? Um, her advice was to make friends with the Cersei Terra entity. No, don't make friends with that. Don't make friends with occultic things. Please don't. That you get into trouble that way. Just stay away from
Yeah,
them.
but when you have someone telling you that, and telling you that she told me that I had talked about the Cersei thing, and she intentionally didn't mention the fact that she had been a fan of that character before and had a book with it on the back of it, where she had like kind of valued this book that had a picture of Cersei on the back. And that she had kind of like said, I don't want to mention that because it will set him off on this like paranoid spin, and then
Yeah.
got the tattoo and set me off on the paranoid spin anyways. So yeah, that year 2008, when I was really reading all of the old strips, I didn't know that I was going to have to write an ending to the book. I was just reading it to know what it all was, because it's easier to understand what Dave's talking about if you've actually gone and read all those old strips. You go, oh, okay, I see it.
Hmm.
um and just to looking at the art, so I could better mimic the style. That was a creepy year, because that's when the Cersei stuff was just like everywhere I looked. And then Tori went and bought that book, the Madeline Miller book, so we have that book in our house now.
Another MM, huh?
Yeah, Madeline Miller Cersei, which I tried to read it, and it was all right, but it was just kind of boring. Didn't creep me out, at least. So yeah, I
Well,
promise uh, I won't make associations with any entities. I'm sure Dave would say that you and Tori are both little Yahwehs, tempting me away from creativity, and you know spending more time with family and less time on art. But that's to me, the end of the book is like my biggest takeaway. I could just slave over a drawing board for the rest of my life, or
right.
I could walk into life and have a family and kind of follow, you know, follow that example that you guys set for us,
I
rather
think
than
that's a
be
good choice.
the lonely artist, still slaving over my art. We were
Well, that
creeped out
makes
by
me
this last page too, though, because like right after we did this photograph, and well, basically right when I finished this is when Tori started having all those problems,
oh,
last year,
yeah.
where we think it might have had something to do with the vaccine.
Mhm.
Um, so that went on for 2 or 3 months after this. Loki died. Cammy
Yeah.
started having all the troubles. And so Tori was like, what did you do by putting us in the book at the end there? But
Brought some bad juju in there.
yeah, actually, we got when she was having stomach problems recently, we got a check from Dave, and I realized that it was like the last money I got from him, and then for a print that we did together and sold. And I realized that he had talked about having stomach problems at some point that he had to go have surgery for. And we got that
Oh,
check. We got that and cashed that check like the same day, basically the same weekend that Tori was really having issues, and had to go into the ER and stuff. And so when she got home that day, she said, "Give me that check," and she burned it and buried it out
oh,
and buried it outside and like ran around waving sage all over the place.
to clean out all the evil spirits.
Yeah, so I think she buys into this stuff. You know, she's more creeped out. She's never even read it, but just from hearing me talk about it, she hates it because she's like, it makes her paranoid. Like she buys into that there's these entities messing with us more than I do. Or that somehow like Dave had transferred his past stomach problems onto her now, is like, I don't know, that it came with the check somehow. So I had video footage of her for a second running around the backyard burying it, but I deleted that because uh, I would like to continue having a tall superhero partner and not someone who's mad at me
Distance
because
yourself from any of that. I
well,
was I was thinking on that last page that because of all of there had been a lot of mention earlier in the book about different people posing in front of portraits of themselves or people that look like them or whatever,
yeah,
that you should have had one of your self portraits that we have hanging up at home, you know, the applesauce king or the somebody hanging up
yeah.
on that blank wall there, you know.
I think that's probably where I would have like, that's where I would be like, I don't know that I want to do that. I don't know that I want to like access that. If that's a real thing, I don't think it
Then
is,
don't mess
but
with
I
it.
don't think I want to, like, I'm already playing enough with the boundaries between real life and comics. I don't think I need to triple it up in the way that they were doing, you know? Like, I'm
So that was
skeptical. I'm cautiously skeptical. I don't know that I buy into the whole thing, but I'm also a skeptic. Like, I don't ever come down firmly and say, no, that's impossible. Like, what do I know? So it could all be real. And like, why do I want to tempt that any more than I already am? I
so
tried to
that was a
write myself.
conscious.
Yeah, I tried to write myself out of it. Well, no, I hadn't thought to put the picture on the wall, but the ending of the book is very consciously me trying to say, all right, I'm done. I'm gone. That's that's Dave's thing again. So,
That makes sense. Well, I think that's a good choice. Always better to choose life.
and family and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. And hopefully be supported to still do some art in the end, but not everything I do. So, yeah. And that's why I want to get you involved, get the family involved. And uh you've actually surprised me quite a few times during this, and I hope you
Oh,
surprised
good.
our viewers. And I'm really hoping that there's like a wave of people saying that they want more Mama Ba reacts.
Okay, I don't know about that,
Uh,
but
I've got one more in mind that I want to talk to you about at least. We'll
okay.
we'll see. Are you willing to do more of these? You're a very good, careful reader.
Oh, thank you. Well, and actually, I had two other little interesting things that caught my eye. I don't know if you have
Oh yeah,
time
yeah,
to.
yeah. No, I go on forever.
So page 290, the magician. Um, just when I saw those poses of the magician, it's like that looks like our Statue of Liberty. Is there a connection between those two? The design?
I'm not sure
You
about that
know,
because she doesn't have the hand down, does she?
she's got the torch being lifted up like that.
Yeah, but part of that symbol is really important, the finger pointing down, because the finger pointing down is the connection between the spiritual and the physical. So
Okay.
if she's just raising it up, I think the Statue of Liberty, the other hand is hidden.
I'm looking through my New York pictures.
Yeah. I don't
Oh,
think
it's
so.
holding it's holding a book,
Yeah, no, that would
holding the
be
law
no,
or
I don't think
something.
so. I mean, a hand up is a victory sign too, you know,
Okay.
like holding the torch. But in that symbol specifically, um, No, it's that connect. It's the wand is grabbing the kind of the connection to the spiritual world, and then the fingers
Okay.
pointing down to. They're acting as like a conduit between the two, right? So that's
Okay.
completing the circuit. So I don't think that the Statue of Liberty is doing that. But
That
I mean,
makes sense.
I studied that stuff. I was pretty heavy into that stuff for a while, not anymore, but I immediately recognized that. It was like, well, that's the magician. No duh. So if he is messing around with Crowley, then he would have been quite aware of the tarot, and that pose would
Right.
be pretty intentional, I would think. And then you're talking about inversion. Well, it's a female doing it instead of a male, and it's flipped. It's like the
Right.
hands are flipped. So
The other hand. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing was, and I don't know where I got this, but there was not any mention of there being a Rip Kirby comic and then a Jack Kirby artist.
Yeah, Dave, you're slacking.
I just is there, I mean, was there something with that too, or that's just, they
I'm sure he could go on about it. Maybe he didn't think it was relevant to the story. I mean, we do have some Jack Kirby pages in here. Um, but yeah, he never goes there. I'm aware that that connection exists. I don't know that Dave ever did anything with it as a bit of interpretation. Um,
it just seemed like every other little connection was mentioned, and then I
yeah.
saw that and I was like, wait a minute. Nobody said anything about Jack Kirby and
And
Rip
this
Kirby.
234, 235 Young Romance, that's a Jack Kirby cover in the middle there. So how cool is my mom, everybody? Just because I talked about that all the time. She knows who Jack Kirby is. Oh yeah. And Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, as you called him to his face once.
Oh, right. It shows
No,
you how clueless I am about comic artists and stuff.
I just remember that you guys took me to the Image offices because they were right by Grandma's house,
Yeah.
and they were preparing
That's
for Comic Con. And you went, "Hey Carson, isn't that Rob Liefeld?" And he kind of went, and I was like, "Mom, it's Liefeld."
oops. Sorry.
No, that's just funny story. Any other ones that you wanted to put Dave on blast for missing? Because that's funny.
No, I think I picked out all of that stuff. Um I have something written down here about the attitudes. Oh, that Margaret Mitchell did. Wouldn't that be considered just like a performance art piece?
Oh no, that wasn't Margaret Mitchell. That was Lady Hamilton. The
Oh, okay.
Attitudes of Lady Hamilton. So she's the one that's in that the page with the magician. That's a painting of Lady Hamilton as Circe. She posed for a painting as Circe. And she was very famous for doing these performances, which were new at the time. But I mean, this is in, I'm really bad with dates. I don't know, late 1700s, early 1800s, where she was performing those attitudes, and she would act out or pose herself live, like a live diorama almost, in the
Hmm.
pose of paintings. So yeah, it's interesting because I don't think we really talk about performance art being a thing until the 1950s or 1960s, but she was crossing that boundary. But it was seen more as like a theater thing or kind of like a novelty act at that time. It wouldn't have been
Yeah.
connected. Even though she was posing as a painting and like holding still so you could go see the live painting, I don't think they were connecting it. Plus, I mean, society just didn't have the same type of categories about that stuff that we do now. But they didn't have that concept of like performance art. It would have just been some kind of variation on theater, I think. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
She's
That's
she's
something
a
you think.
feminist. The feminist art historians need to go back. Here's, since we're always handing out theses on this channel, Lady Hamilton, as 250 years before performance art, setting the standard for performance art. There's your critical theory, feminist, revisionist history thesis that you can all go write. And Dave would love that. So
There you go.
there you go. Anything else?
The last note that I have here is on page 300. There's something written about the I being a capital I and that being significant. Um,
Yeah, I mean, that's Dave had this thing that he thought that Ward Green would tell the letterer to do 2 dots instead of 3 dots on the ellipsis. Isn't that what it's called? An ellipsis, where
ellipse.
it's like dot dot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and there's a number of times in looking at the old Rip Kirby stuff where Dave noticed that there was only 2 dots instead of 3. Um, like even that panel up above says, I haven't looked at it in years, dot, dot. And then later down it says these days, dot, dot, dot. And so I don't know what clued Dave into that, but he started to think that that was Ward Green using the dot, dot, which is I in Morse code. and
Right.
and that he was using that as a way to designate when he was making a statement through the character's mouth versus just a bit of dialogue. And I thought that was one of the crazier suppositions that Dave made. Like, bro, they probably just ran out of space in the word balloon, so they used 2 instead of 3 just to save space, right?
Yeah.
Like that was my initial reaction. But when I was going back and I was looking for this character that has the magnifying glass, because I realized that's in one of the very first Rip Kirby strips, that you have that guy with the devil mustache and goatee, which is also the character in the very last Rip Kirby strip. And the very last panel here is, I'm afraid my research work is ended. I remember that there was a guy who looked pretty much like that in one of the very first strips. I don't think it's the first one, but one of the first couple storylines. So I was going back to find that and then reading the dialogue. And I realized there was this whole thing in there where they're talking about the dots, and that the dots were part of a code, and that it related to the word I. And then I started reading it more carefully, and I was like, this is really strange the way that they're talking about the letter I, because you wouldn't scratch out a dot over the capital I, like just the way they talk about it didn't quite line up. So it seemed like maybe some more evidence that Dave wasn't as like off as I thought with that would have been the early instance where Ward Green explains his code, because they're saying like, hey, it's a, if you can solve this puzzle, you get the formula. And then he says, well, it's in my coat pocket. He's lying. Nothing is in his coat but this letter. And then he says the dot over the first I in the opening sentence. Well, it was the first I, it would be a capital I. It wouldn't have a dot over it. And then when they write it in comic book writing, you always write the I with a capital I. So it just starts to get weird there. Like if it was the first I in a handwritten letter, it should be capital anyways. So why would you be scratching out a dot over it? And then he says, so it is a piece of microfilm is set into the scratched out dot over the I. So the clue to the whole thing was embedded in the missing dot over the I, right? Like that's where the microfilm is hidden. He scratched that out and put a dot in there. So that could be, if that was evidence of like, oh, maybe he is saying like, look, the clue to interpreting my code is hidden in the scratched out dot that refers to the letter I. And it would be extra weird as a bit of dialogue to be talking about the scratched out dot over the first I in the sentence, because it wouldn't have that. It would be a capital I.
Well, unless the first word was not I, unless the first I in the sentence was in another word like or is or something like that.
Yeah, it could be.
I just wondered if they typed a capital I just to distinguish it so it's not mistaken for a lowercase l or something like that.
Yeah, but usually in comics, when you put like if you look at the so it is, if you're writing a lowercase I, you just do the dash. And if you write an uppercase I, which is only used for the like the saying me, then you have the bars across it. But otherwise, it's
Right.
just a dash. So to me, it looked like an I. They're showing a capital I. Like, you really go out of your way to make sure you're writing a capital I in comics lettering. And you can see in the
Okay.
rest of it, it's always the lowercase, even if it's the first one in the sentence. So I don't know. It's not, that's just connecting a lot of crazy dots. But going back, I thought, okay, well, there is extra evidence in the story of the dot being scratched out, being connected to the letter I, that's referencing I myself, that has to do with a missing dot, decoding something. So,
So it
you
could
know,
be.
take that as you will, but that's what that was about.
Yeah. Well, I guess it could be because, spies, they say send messages like that and, want ads and whatever, where the code is hidden within the text somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, like, it could be. And if he was into the occult, and if he was putting, because there are these other strange things, like her wearing the shirt with all the other comic strip names over them,
Hmm.
things where you're like, that's a weird artistic decision, someone sat there and asked for that. But it could just be that the letterer ran out of room and put two dots instead of three. Like, so
Who knows? Who knows?
yeah.
So my one last thought is when it was talking about Oscar Lebec and all of his crazy inventions made me think of Jules Verne because
Yeah.
there was a lot of stuff, going Back to the Future movies and all that. There was a lot of stuff that Jules Verne thought of way before it was reality. It made me think of that. All those,
It's pretty impressive though, isn't it?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's whether someone actually had like a pipeline into the future, or whether they were just, really good at speculating on the consequences of where things were going. um which is what good sci-fi does. He landed a lot of them. And then
yeah.
Dave is obviously tying that to uh that twin earth, and that's where I got into, like, oh, the Terra Tara,
Hmm.
Mother Earth type of stuff. And us, and he was tying it to a society ruled by women too, that the future would be, a feminine ruled future,
Right.
and that technology would be part of that, and that the internet would be part of that shift. uh, so yeah, I mean, I would really like to go read those. I don't know that anyone's collected those strips as a full. They must have, because Dave's reading them somewhere. But I'd like to get a hold of those. I'd like to read those. They look good.
I'd never heard about him. So I thought that was pretty cool that um, he had all those ideas and things that, I think a lot of times that's where the ideas come from is the creative, artistic people that have imaginations like yours that go way beyond what I ever even consider, and then somebody goes, that's a really cool idea. I'm going to figure out how to do that,
Yeah, and then
and
it's
then it
not
becomes
prophecy.
reality.
It's self-fulfilling, right? You plant the
Yeah.
seed in someone's head, and then Elon Musk goes, "Yeah, I'd like to live on Mars," and then, I'd like to have sun-powered cars, and he goes and makes
Yeah.
battery cars and SpaceX.
Yeah.
And
Somebody with
tunnels
the
under.
engineering type of mind figures out how to actually do it.
Yeah.
So,
So, yeah.
all
Well,
right.
thanks, Mom. I appreciate it.
That's
I
it.
appreciate you taking the time. And I hope you check in on this video and see that the thoughtful comments that our viewers leave.
Okay. I don't know, it's always pretty embarrassing to watch and listen to yourself or myself on tape, being recorded, but anything for my son.
Well, you don't have to watch it. Just go read the comments and reply to them.
Okay, okay.
Because we
Oh,
have
okay.
awesome viewers who are very nice and they're very thoughtful. And I think they're going to think you're awesome.
All right. Well, that's what it is. I hope it works out well for your station, your channel,
All right.
whatever.
Thanks, Mom. I'm going to go. Gary's here visiting. So I'm going to go hang out with family now.
All right. Have
All right.
fun.
Love you, Mom.
Bye.
Thanks.
Love
Thanks
you
for
too.
watching, guys. Bye.
Bye.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe